My name is Vera Osei, and I am 38 years old. For 6 years, I ran the back office of my father-in-law's construction company without a paycheck, a contract, or a single line on my resume. I scheduled the crews, managed the vendor accounts, processed the payroll, handled the insurance renewals, and kept the books in a system I built from scratch when I arrived and found a shoebox of receipts and a spreadsheet that had not been updated since 2017. I did all of this because I loved my husband, and because his family needed help, and because I was good at it, and because I believed that doing the right thing for the people you love eventually becomes visible to them. It does not always become visible, but the records do. When my father-in-law announced he was retiring and selling the company, he sold it to his nephew, who had worked there for 11 months. He offered my husband a job at the company, as an employee, in a role 2 levels below what Marcus had been doing as family co-manager for 9 years. He offered me nothing, because officially I had never been there at all. What he did not know was that I had been keeping a paper trail since month 2. Not because I suspected anything. Because I am the daughter of a Ghanaian accountant who told me at age 12 that a woman's work disappears the moment she stops doing it, and the only way to make it permanent is to write it down. I wrote everything down. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories. I am Vera, and this is the channel where women who were told they were just helping discover that helping, documented correctly, has a legal name. It is called contribution, and contribution, in the right circumstances, can be valued. If you are new here, subscribe and drop your city below. I read every comment. And stay with me because this story moves slowly at first, and then it moves very fast. Let me take you back to the summer I married Marcus Osei. I was 31. Marcus was 34. We met at a professional development workshop for small business owners. He was there because his father had sent him. I was there because I had just left a corporate HR role and was thinking about starting my own consulting practice. He sat next to me during the cash flow module and whispered that the presenter had made an error on slide 7. I looked at slide 7. He was right. We talked for 3 hours after the workshop ended. He was quiet in the way that people who think carefully are quiet, not shy, just measured. He told me about the family company, Osei Construction, started by his father Edmund 30 years ago, residential and light commercial builds in the greater Cincinnati area. 12 full-time employees, a roster of about 30 subcontractors, steady work, solid reputation. His father was slowing down. Marcus had been managing day-to-day operations for 4 years. He said, "It's a good company. It just needs systems." I said, "I build systems." He smiled. That was the beginning. We married 14 months later. Small wedding, 2 families, a backyard in September. Edmund gave a toast that made everyone cry. He said Marcus had found a woman with her head on straight, and that the company needed that energy. He looked at me when he said it. I took it as welcome. It was welcome, in the way that welcome sometimes functions as an assignment. 3 weeks after the honeymoon, Edmund asked if I could help with some office things. Just temporarily. His longtime office manager, a woman named Patrice, had left abruptly. Family situation, sudden, and the administrative side was behind. Could I fill in for a few weeks while they found someone? I said yes. Of course. It was family. I want to tell you about those first 2 weeks, because they set the template for everything that came after. I walked into the back office of Osei Construction on a Monday morning and found the following: vendor invoices from 3 months ago that had not been entered into the accounting software. A payroll processing queue that was 4 days late. 2 insurance certificates that had expired. A permit application that had a deadline in 11 days and had not been started. A filing system that was organized, as far as I could tell, by the principle of whatever landed on top. I did not panic. I made a list. I worked through it in order of urgency. By Friday, the payroll was processed, the insurance certificates were renewed, the permit application was submitted with 3 days to spare, and I had begun rebuilding the filing system. Edmund stopped by the office that Friday afternoon. He looked around. He said, You're a natural at this. I smiled. I said, happy to help. He said, we'll get someone hired soon. Patrice's shoes are hard to fill. They did not get someone hired. The weeks became a month, the month became 3 months, 3 months became a year. Every few months Edmund would mention finding someone. Every time something came up, a big project came in, a crew issue needed attention, it wasn't the right time. And every time I was already there, already keeping things running, and it was easier to let me keep running them than to train someone new. I understood what was happening. I am not naive. I understood that the convenience of my presence had become an argument against replacing it with a paid professional. I told Marcus in the 2nd year. I said, I need us to talk about my role here. He said, what do you mean? I said, I mean I'm doing the work of a full-time office manager and bookkeeper and I am not being compensated. I think that needs to change. He said, it's family, Vera. It's not like they're not providing for us. This is the part of the story where I want to be careful, because Marcus is a good man, and what he said was not cruel, it was habitual. He had grown up in a family where the women's work was visible but uncompensated, where contribution was assumed to be its own reward, where the phrase its family was used the way a key is used, to open doors that should perhaps have stayed locked. I said, I understand it's family. I'm asking about compensation. He talked to Edmund. Edmund said he had always planned to include us when the company was eventually passed on, that I was as good as family, that everything he was building was going to benefit Marcus and me in the end. I said, I'd like that in writing. Edmund laughed warmly. He said, Vera, you don't need a contract with family. I did not push further. Not that day. But that night, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it, OSE Construction, My Contribution. And I started writing. Here is what I documented, starting in month 2 and continuing for 6 years. Every Monday morning, I logged what I had worked on the previous week. Hours, tasks, outcomes. I described every vendor relationship I managed, every subcontractor payment I processed, every insurance renewal I handled, every permit I filed, every payroll cycle I ran. I saved every email I sent on company business. I kept a copy of every document I created, every contract template I drafted, every filing system I designed, every process I built from scratch. I also documented the numbers. Revenue when I arrived, $1.4 million annually. Revenue by year 3, $2.1 million. By year 5, $2.8 million. I did not cause all of that growth. Marcus did the sales and the client relationships and the project management. Edmund still did some estimating. But the operational infrastructure that allowed the company to scale, the vendor terms I renegotiated, the payroll system I upgraded, the insurance program I restructured to save $18,000 annually, the accounts receivable process I built that cut their average collection time from 67 days to 31, that was mine. I did not document it to build a case. I documented it because my father told me to, and because I am the kind of person who believes that what is real should be legible. I also kept a separate log. Quieter. More personal. A record of the moments that told me something was wrong before I had language for what it was. Year 2, Edmund's nephew, a man named Kwame, joins the company as a project coordinator. Kwame is 26, energetic, personable, not particularly organized. Edmund introduces him to clients as the future of the company. He does not introduce me to clients at all. Year 3, the company wins a significant contract, a 16-unit residential development, the largest in its history. Edmund gives a speech at a crew dinner. He thanks Marcus. He thanks the lead carpenter. He thanks the subcontractors. He does not mention me, though I had spent 3 weeks processing the permit applications and coordinating the insurance certificates that made the contract possible. Year 4, a client calls the office and asks to speak with whoever handles the accounts. I take the call. I resolve the billing dispute in 20 minutes. The client sends a thank you email to Edmund. Edmund forwards it to Marcus. Nobody forwards it to me. Year 5. Edmund starts talking about retirement. He says he wants the company to stay in the family. He looks at Kwame when he says this more often than he looks at Marcus. I file this under a category I had not yet named. I was still calling it a feeling. It was becoming a pattern. Year 6. Edmund hires a business broker to value the company. He does not tell us he has hired the broker. I find out because the broker calls the office number to schedule a site visit and I answer the phone. I take the message. I pass it to Edmund. I say nothing else. That night, I opened my folder and added a new entry. Date, time, the broker's name and firm, the nature of the call. I did not know yet what it meant, but I had learned over 6 years that the moments worth documenting were the ones that felt like nothing and turned out to be everything. I want to tell you about my mother-in-law because she is important to this story in a way that is easy to miss. Her name is Abina. She is 63, small, precise, with a kind of stillness that suggests she has spent decades observing things carefully and saying less than half of what she has concluded. She came to the United States from Ghana when she was 27. She raised Marcus and his sister in a house where hard work was not discussed, it was demonstrated. She kept books for Edmund's company in the early years, before it grew large enough to need real accounting help, before Patrice, before me. She and I understood each other in the way that women in the same situation across a generation sometimes do, not with words, not with explicit acknowledgement, but with a specific kind of eye contact that means, I see what you are doing, and I know what it costs, and I am sorry there is not more I can do about it. In year 4, she stopped by the office on a Tuesday afternoon. This was unusual. She sat in the chair across from my desk and watched me work for a few minutes without speaking. Then she said, "Are you keeping records?" I looked up. Yes. She nodded once. Good. She stood, straightened her jacket, and left. We never spoke about it again. I did not need her to say more. She had spent 30 years watching what happened to the work of women in that family, and she had told me the one thing she could tell me. The rest was mine to do. I added her visit to my log. Not to use against her, or Edmund, or anyone. Because it was real, and real things should be written down. I want to take you inside what those 6 years actually felt like, because I think people hear, I documented everything, and imagine a woman sitting in calm foresight, methodically building her case with perfect clarity. That is not what it was. What it was Tuesday mornings at 6:45 a.m. opening the office before anyone else because the insurance broker needed documents by 9 and nobody else knew where the documents were. What it was learning the names of every subcontractor's spouse so that when I called to smooth over a delayed payment I was calling a person, not a vendor number. What it was a Friday afternoon in October of year 3 when a foundation inspection failed on the biggest project in the company's history, and I spent 4 hours on the phone with the permit office while Edmund played golf and Marcus was on site trying to manage the crew, and I rescheduled the reinspection and drafted the corrective action letter and had it submitted before 5 p.m. Nobody mentioned that Friday at the crew dinner 3 weeks later. I mentioned it to my log. Date, time, the specific situation, the resolution, the cost to the company if the reinspection had been missed. That is what documentation looks like from the inside. Not calm foresight. Parallel processing. You are solving the problem with your hands while your other brain, the trained one, the one your father built by making you write down everything before you were allowed to call it done, is quietly making a note. In year 3, I hired a subcontractor named Roy Ellison for the first time. Roy did electrical on residential projects, fast and clean, fair rates, reliable schedule. I had found him through a referral from a supplier I had been cultivating since year 1. Roy became one of our most dependable subcontractors. Over the next 3 years, the company paid Roy's firm approximately $340,000 in contracts. I had found Roy. I had onboarded Roy. I had negotiated Roy's rate structure and processed every one of his invoices and called him personally the one time a payment was delayed to make sure the relationship stayed intact. Not once in 3 years did anyone ask how we had found Roy, because Roy was just there, the way the lights were just on and the payroll was just processed and the permits were just filed. The infrastructure was invisible because I made it invisible by making it reliable. That is the trap of competence. When you do the work well enough that it disappears into the background, you have also made it easy for people to forget that someone is doing it. I have thought about this a great deal in the years since. I think there is a particular kind of woman, and it is not only women, but it is mostly women, in my experience, who is so good at making things work that she makes herself functionally invisible. She is not overlooked because she is unimportant. She is overlooked because she has successfully created the impression that things run on their own. I was that woman. I had spent 3 years building a company's operational infrastructure so well that the people benefiting from it had started to believe it had always been that way. Year 4 was the year I almost said something publicly. Not to Patricia. I had not yet found Patricia. To Edmund, at a client dinner in April. A developer named Harlan Boateng, large potential contract, dinner at a good restaurant. Edmund, Marcus, Kwame, and Harlan at the table. I had prepared the company materials, the project portfolio, the capability overview, the insurance certifications Harlan's firm required, a one-page financial summary that Edmund had asked me to put together. I had put it together. I had printed it and assembled it and brought it to the restaurant and placed it at Edmund's seat before the dinner started. Edmund opened the portfolio. He looked at it. He turned to Harlan and said, "This is what we bring to every partnership." Harlan picked it up. He leafed through it. He said, "This is well organized." "Who put this together?" Edmund said, "We have good people." "Not my daughter-in-law. Not Vera, who has been running our back office for 4 years. We have good people." I sat across the table and looked at the portfolio I had made, and I said nothing. I drove home that night with Marcus, and I said, "He told Harlan we have good people." Marcus said, "He meant you." I said, "He didn't say me." Marcus didn't answer. He had no answer. Because the thing that had happened was small and real and wrong, and there was nothing useful to say about it that didn't lead somewhere neither of us was ready to go yet. I went home and I wrote it in the log. Not because I thought I would ever use it. Because I needed to write it somewhere. Because the thing that happens when you are invisible is that you start to wonder whether you are imagining it, and the antidote to that is to write down what is real. April, Year 4. Client dinner. Portfolio assembled by me. Portfolio referenced generically. My name not mentioned. One line. Dated. Filed. And then I went to bed, and I got up the next morning and opened the office at 6:45 and started on the week's payroll because it was not going to process itself. Year 5 was the year Kwame got his own business cards. This is a small detail. But I want you to understand the small details because they are the grammar of what eventually became a sentence. Kwame had been with the company for 2 years at this point. He was doing well enough, better organized than when he started, genuinely improving, and Edmund clearly enjoyed mentoring him. His business card said, Kwame Osei, Project Development, Osei Construction. I did not have business cards. I had an email address. I had a phone number that appeared in vendor correspondence. I had been referred to in client communications variously as our office, the company, our team, and, in one memorable email from a satisfied vendor, the woman who actually knows where everything is. I asked Edmund in year 5 if I could have business cards. He said, "What would they say?" I said, "Operations manager." Or office manager. Whatever title makes sense. He said, "We'll figure that out. Don't worry about it." I filed that conversation. I did not get business cards. Kwame had business cards. This is the kind of thing that sounds petty when you say it out loud. I know how it sounds. But here is what business cards actually represent. A decision about who is legible in an organization. Who exists, officially, as a person with a role. The business card is the company saying, in a small physical form, this person is here, this person has a function, this person is real. I was doing the work of 3 people and I did not exist on cardstock. I added it to the log. I did not make it significant in the log. I noted it the way I noted everything, as a fact. But facts accumulate, and eventually facts that seem unrelated start to form a shape. I could see the shape by year 5. I was choosing not to name it yet. Naming it meant doing something about it, and I was not ready to do something about it, and I was also not ready to stop doing the work, because the work mattered and people depended on it, and I had spent 5 years building something that I still, even then, believed would eventually be recognized. This is the hardest thing to admit about those 6 years. Not the not being compensated. Not the not being mentioned at the crew dinner or the client dinner. The hardest thing is that I kept believing, for longer than I should have, that the recognition was coming. That Edmund saw it and was simply slow to formalize it. That Marcus understood more than he said. That the company would eventually be structured in a way that reflected what everyone in it already knew, that I was holding up a significant portion of the floor. I am not a naive woman. I am the daughter of an accountant. I know what documentation is for. And I still let myself believe, for 5 years, that I would not need to use it. I think about this when women ask me, when should I start keeping records? And the answer I give them is, start on the first day. Not because you expect to need them. Because the people who needed them and didn't have them are the ones who learned, too late, that expectation is not documentation, and belief is not proof. Start on the first day. I started on day 60. That was soon enough. Barely. Here is what Edmund did not know when he announced the sale to Kwame. He did not know about the folder. He did not know I had been logging contributions for 6 years. He did not know I had saved 47 emails that referenced my role. He did not know I had a financial analysis showing the specific dollar value of the operational improvements I had made. He did not know that Patricia Kemderim existed, or that I had already been in her office twice before the letter arrived on his desk. He thought he was making a business decision in the way that patriarchs make business decisions, from the top, with authority, about his own company by his own rules. He thought the people around him would be surprised, perhaps hurt, perhaps resentful, but ultimately unable to do anything about it because ultimately it was his company and his choice. He was right that it was his choice. He was wrong that it was uncontestable. What he had not accounted for was the possibility that I had been building something too, quietly, in parallel, in a folder on my laptop that now contained 6 years of everything I had ever done and every dollar I had ever saved and every assurance he had ever put in writing. He had not accounted for it because it had not occurred to him that I would do it, that I was the kind of woman who would do it, because for 6 years I had made the work invisible. I had been so good at it that nobody had thought to wonder what I was keeping. The folder was the one thing I hadn't made invisible. The folder was just for me. Until it wasn't. Edmund called a family dinner to share the news. He framed it as wonderful. The company his father had started from nothing was now worth $3.1 million, a testament to the family's hard work, a source of pride. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. Edmund said he was thinking about the future, that he wanted to retire within the year, that he had been having conversations about the best way to transition the company. Marcus asked, "Transition to whom?" Edmund said, "That's what we need to discuss as a family." I watched Kwame, who was at the table, cut his chicken very carefully. The dinner continued. The transition was not further discussed. I drove home with Marcus in a quiet that felt like held breath. 3 days later, Edmund called Marcus into a meeting. He did not include me. Marcus came home that evening and sat at the kitchen table and told me what had been said. Edmund was planning to sell the company to Kwame. Not an open market sale, a structured internal transfer. Edmund would finance a portion, the bank would finance the rest, and Kwame would buy Edmund out over 10 years. The company would remain OSE Construction. Edmund would retain a consulting role for 2 years. Marcus's role, offered a position as senior project manager, reporting to Kwame. A salary that was $15,000 less than what Marcus had been effectively earning as co-manager. No equity. No ownership. My role. Not mentioned. Marcus said. He said Kwame has the energy to take it forward. That someone young needs to be building it. I said, Kwame has been there 11 months. Marcus said, I know. I said, you've been there 9 years. Marcus said, I know, Vera. I said, and you're going to accept this? He looked at the table. He looked like a man who had been told something he had always feared might be true and was still deciding whether to believe it. Marcus loved his father. Marcus had trusted his father. The distance between those two things and what had just happened was something I could see him measuring in real time. I said, don't answer me now. But I need you to know that I am not going to accept it. And I need you to know that I have documentation. He looked up. What kind of documentation? 6 years, I said. Everything. And I need to talk to someone who knows business law before we respond to your father. The attorney's name was Patricia Nkemdirim. She was referred to me by a woman in my professional network, a CFO I had met at a workshop 2 years earlier who said, if you ever need someone who understands family business disputes and doesn't blink, call Patricia. Patricia did not blink. She was in her mid-40s, Nigerian-American, with a practice that focused specifically on closely held business disputes and family business transitions. When I sat down in her office and told her the situation, she asked one question before I had finished. She said, do you have documentation of your contributions? I said, yes. She said, how much? I said, 6 years. Weekly logs, saved emails, financial records before and after, system documentation, vendor correspondence. She was quiet for a moment. Then, have you been compensated for any of this work? No. Has there been any written acknowledgement of your role, in email, in company documents, in anything? I thought about it. I said, Edmund introduced me to a new vendor in year 3 by saying she's the one who keeps this place running. The vendor sent an email that week thanking me for getting their accounts set up. I have that email. Patricia said, that is something. What else? I walked her through the folder. Not everything. I had brought a summary, organized by category. The financial metrics. The system documentation. The vendor relationships I could trace through correspondence. The insurance program restructuring with the cost savings I had calculated. The permit filing records. She listened the way good attorneys listen, not reacting, just gathering. When I finished, she asked, what do you want? It was the most important question anyone had asked me in 6 years, and I had been thinking about the answer since Marcus came home from that meeting. I said, I want my work to be recognized as what it was, a material contribution to the value of this company. I want compensation for it. And I want my husband to be treated fairly in the transition. Patricia nodded. Let me tell you what we might be looking at. In Ohio, when an individual performs substantial labor for a family business without compensation, based on a reasonable expectation of future benefit, and there are grounds to argue that Edmund's assurances constituted that expectation, there are theories of recovery. Unjust enrichment. Quantum meruit, that's Latin for what one deserves, which is essentially the legal concept that you pay for the value you receive, even without a formal contract. In some circumstances, promissory estoppel, if representations were made that you relied upon. I said, he told Marcus we'd be taken care of. That the company would come to us. Patricia said, did anyone else hear that? I thought about Abina's visit to the office. Her one question. Her single nod. I said, his wife might have. Patricia was quiet. Then, I want to review everything you've brought. And I want you to start pulling together any email in which Edmund referenced your role, your future, or the company's succession. Anything at all. Even if it seems minor. I went home and spent 3 evenings going through 6 years of email. I found 47 messages. In 11 of them, Edmund had referenced my work specifically. In 3, he had made statements about the company's future that could be read as inclusive. One in particular, from year 2, in which he had written to a client who was asking about back-office support. Don't worry about the administrative side, Vera has that completely under control. She's as much a part of this operation as anyone. As much a part of this operation as anyone. I printed that email. I put it at the front of the folder. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with Marcus before we did anything. It was a Sunday evening. The children, we have 2, a daughter named Adwoa who is 7 and a son named Kofi who is 4, were asleep. We were at the kitchen table with decaf and the folder open between us. Marcus read through it slowly. He read the weekly logs going back to the beginning. He read the financial summaries. He read the emails. He read the log entry about the crew dinner in year 3 where Edmund had not mentioned me. He read it all the way to the end. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at it for a long time. Then he said, I didn't know you were doing this. I said, I know. He said, why didn't you tell me? I thought about how to answer that honestly. I said, because I didn't want it to be a fight between us and your family. I wanted to believe it wouldn't be necessary. And by the time I understood it was going to be necessary, I had already been doing it for years, and it felt like my thing to carry. He was quiet. I could see him recalibrating, not just the situation, but something about us, about what I had been holding that he had not known was there. He said, I'm sorry. I should have seen it earlier. I should have pushed harder. I said, you're seeing it now. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to talk to Patricia again. And I want you to come with me. He said, yes. That was all. He did not hesitate, did not hedge, did not say let me think about it. He said yes, and I understood that he had been the man who whispered about the error on slide 7 all along, careful, precise, and, when he understood the situation fully, willing to act. We went to Patricia together the following week. Patricia sent a letter. Not a lawsuit, a letter. Carefully worded, factual, professional. It identified me by name and described my role at OSE Construction over 6 years in specific terms. It referenced the financial improvements that could be traced to my contributions with specific figures. It cited Edmund's email from year 2, as much a part of this operation as anyone, and 2 others from subsequent years. It noted the reasonable expectation of benefit that had been established by Edmund's statements about the company's future. It requested a meeting to discuss the transition in good faith, and it made clear that if a good faith discussion was not possible, other avenues were available to establish the value of my uncompensated contribution. I want to tell you what it felt like to approve that letter, because I have been asked about it and I think the honest answer is surprising. It felt like relief. Not excitement. Not triumph. Not even particularly like justice, which is a word with more electricity in it than what I felt. It felt like something that had been held under pressure for a long time being allowed to move. Like the week after the permit filing in year 1, when every crisis had been resolved and the filing cabinet was organized and the payroll was processed, and I sat in the empty office at 6 p.m. on a Friday and felt, briefly, like I could breathe. It felt like that. But larger and quieter and slower. I signed the letter approval and sent it back to Patricia at 11:03 p.m. on a Wednesday. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed and slept for 7 hours, which was more than I had slept in 3 consecutive nights since Edmund's announcement. Edmund received the letter on a Thursday. He called Marcus on Friday morning. Marcus let it go to voicemail. Edmund's message was brief and shaken in the way that people who have not been confronted in a long time sound when they finally are. He said he did not understand where this was coming from. He said he hoped we could talk. He said the letter was not necessary between family. Marcus texted back, "We'll meet with you and Patricia. Let us know when you're available. There was a day between that text and Edmund's response where nothing happened, and I want to tell you about that day because it was one of the stranger ones in this whole experience. It was a Saturday. Marcus and I took the children to the park. Kofi chased a dog that belonged to someone else. Adwoa found a caterpillar and wanted to take it home, and we had a 20-minute conversation about the caterpillar's feelings about being relocated. Marcus pushed the swings. I sat on a bench in the October sun and thought about nothing at all. The pause between sending the letter and receiving the response was the only pause I had taken in 6 years. I had not realized how badly I needed it until I was in the middle of it, sitting in the sun watching my husband push my daughter on a swing, with nothing to file and nothing to log and nothing to manage. Edmund wrote back on Sunday. The meeting was the following Wednesday. Edmund came alone. He sat across from Patricia, who sat next to Marcus and me, and he looked at me with an expression I had spent 6 years hoping I would never see, a combination of surprise and something close to shame, underneath the defensiveness. He was 61 years old, and he had built something real, and he had made a mistake about a person in his own family, and he was in a lawyer's office on a Wednesday morning being told about it by that person's attorney, and I think it was genuinely one of the harder things he had experienced. I am not sorry it happened. I am not without compassion for the fact that it was hard. Patricia opened the folder. She walked him through it the way a good attorney walks a witness through evidence, chronologically, specifically, without drama. She showed him the logs. She showed him the financial comparisons. She showed him the insurance restructuring analysis. She showed him his own emails, read his own words back to him. She said, "Mr. Osei, I want to be clear about what we are presenting. This is not a dispute about your right to sell your company as you see fit. That is entirely your prerogative. This is a conversation about the uncompensated value that was contributed to that company over 6 years by your daughter-in-law, whose work is reflected in the valuation your broker produced." Edmund said, "Vera has always been family. Nobody said she wasn't." Patricia said, "Her contribution is reflected in the $3.1 million that your company is now worth. We would like to discuss how that contribution is recognized in the transition." Edmund said, "This feels like a legal action against my family." Patricia said, "It is a conversation. Legal action looks different, and we would prefer not to have that conversation." Edmund looked at Marcus. Marcus met his father's eyes steadily. He said, "Dad, she built the systems that let the company grow. You know that. We just need you to acknowledge it." Edmund was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the room got very still. I watched him the way I had learned to watch people who were calculating, looking for the moment when the math resolved into a decision. Then he said, "What are you asking for?" Patricia slid a document across the table. "I want to be honest about what we asked for, because I have thought carefully about whether it was the right amount, and I believe it was. We did not ask for the company. We did not ask to block the sale to Kwame. We did not ask Edmund to rewrite his retirement plans. We asked for 3 things. First, a structured payment to me, representing 6 years of uncompensated labor at the rate a comparable office manager and bookkeeper would have earned in the Cincinnati market." Patricia had pulled salary data. The figure, accounting for the full scope of my responsibilities, was $52,000 annually. 6 years, adjusted for the first partial year, came to $298,000. We asked for $250,000, rounded down, payable over 4 years from the proceeds of the company sale. Second, an adjustment to Marcus's offered role. Not ownership. We understood the decision to sell to Kwame, but a title that reflected 9 years of co-management, a salary at market rate for a senior operations director, and a 2-year non-compete carve-out that would allow Marcus to leave and start something independent if the arrangement did not work. Third, a written acknowledgement, not for legal purposes but for the record, that my contributions had been material to the company's growth during the period in question. Not a public statement. A letter, in Edmund's words, kept in my file. Edmund read the document. He looked at me. I held his gaze. I was not angry. I had stopped being angry somewhere in the process of compiling the folder, in the strange way that documentation has of converting feeling into fact. Anger is loud and burns out. Records are quiet and last. He said, the $250,000 is significant. Patricia said, the contribution was significant. He said, I need to talk to my attorney. Patricia said, of course. We'd like to hear back within 2 weeks. Edmund talked to his attorney. His attorney, apparently, looked at Patricia's folder and told him the same thing Patricia had told me from the other direction, that a 6-year pattern of uncompensated labor, performed under repeated assurances of future benefit, with documented financial impact, was exactly the kind of fact pattern that made unjust enrichment claims uncomfortable in court. Edmund came back in 10 days. Not 2 weeks. 10 days. He did not bring his attorney. He called Patricia's office and asked if he could come in. He arrived with Abina. Abina had not been in any of the previous conversations. I had not expected her to be in this one. She sat next to Edmund in the chair that had been empty the week before, and she did not look at her husband when he spoke. She looked at me. Edmund said he had thought about it. He said he had spoken with the company broker about the structure of the sale and whether a portion of the proceeds could be allocated differently than originally planned. He said he wanted to handle this in a way that was fair. Then he said, I should have paid you from the beginning. It was not exactly an apology. It was not exactly an acknowledgement. It was something in between, the thing people say when they have been told they were wrong and have decided to accept it without fully inhabiting the acceptance. I have seen that particular formulation before. I took it for what it was and did not require it to be more. Abina said nothing, but she put her hand briefly on the table in front of her, and I understood it was as close as she could come to saying what she had said to me in the office 4 years earlier. Are you keeping records? Good. We reached an agreement that afternoon. The payment was $235,000. Not $250,000. We negotiated down slightly as a gesture of good faith, which Patricia had advised me was often worth more than the $15,000 it cost. Paid over 3 years from the sale proceeds, with the first payment at closing. Marcus's role was restructured. Senior Operations Director, market rate salary, the 2-year carve-out we had requested. He could leave without penalty at any point in those 2 years and compete independently. The letter came a week later, handwritten on Osei construction letterhead, in Edmund's careful script. It said that Vera Osei had served as the operational backbone of Osei Construction for 6 years, that the company's growth during that period reflected her work as much as anyone else's, and that he regretted that it had taken a formal process to say so. I read it twice. I put it in the folder. I labeled it Final. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, which is how he always picks up, because he has never in his life let a phone ring a third time. He is 71 and still works 3 days a week because stopping entirely, he says, would require him to learn a new system for spending his time, and he is too old to rebuild from scratch. I told him what had happened. Not the summary, the whole thing. From the beginning, from the shoebox of receipts and the expired insurance certificates, through 6 years of logs and 47 emails and Patricia's office and the meeting room and the handwritten letter on company letterhead. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. My father's silences are precise. He does not go quiet because he has nothing to say. He goes quiet because he is organizing what he wants to say into the right order. Then he said, "Did you keep everything from the beginning?" I said, "From month 2. He said, "You should have started on day 1. I said, "I know." He said, "But month 2 is good. Month 2 is early enough." Then he said, "How much?" I told him, $235,000 over 3 years. He made a sound I recognized from my childhood, the sound he made when a calculation came out correctly, a short exhale through the nose that meant, "The numbers are right, the numbers are right, the numbers are right." He said, "Your grandmother kept no records." I knew this. My grandmother had worked in my grandfather's tailor shop for 22 years. When my grandfather died and the shop passed to my uncle, my grandmother received nothing from its sale. She had no documentation of her contribution. She had no paper. She had 30 years of memory and no one to corroborate it. She did not understand that what she was owed had a legal name. She did not understand that there were words for it: unjust enrichment, quantum merit, contribution, and that those words existed specifically because the situation she was in was old enough and common enough to have been given names. I understood because my father had told me. At 12 years old, at a kitchen table in Accra, with a ledger open between us, he had told me, a woman's work disappears the moment she stops doing it, and the only way to make it permanent is to write it down. He had been talking about his own mother. He had been making sure I would not be her. I said, she would have had more if she had known to keep records. He said, yes. A pause. He said, you kept records. I said, yes. He said, good girl. He has been calling me good girl since I was 12 years old, whenever I do something that proves I was listening. I am 38, and I do not mind it even slightly. I sat for a long time in the quiet kitchen after we hung up. I read it once more. I put it in the folder. I labeled it final. And then I sat at my kitchen table and did something I had not done in a long time. I did nothing. I just sat. The sale to Kwame closed 4 months later. Marcus worked under him for 7 months, and then, on a Tuesday in March, he came home and said, I think I want to start something. I said, I know. He said, I've been thinking about it for a while. I said, I know that too. He said, would you do it with me? Properly this time. 50-50. Your name on the paperwork from day one. I looked at my husband across the kitchen table. The man who had whispered about slide 7. The man who had read the folder and said I should have seen it earlier. The man who had sat next to me in Patricia's office and said yes without hesitating. I said, on one condition. He said, name it. I said, we keep records from the beginning. Everything. Every email, every decision, every contribution from both of us. No assumptions. No, it's family. Paperwork first, feelings second. He said, agreed. We shook on it, which sounds formal for 2 people who share a bed and 2 children and a very old couch they have never gotten around to replacing. But I meant it as a formal thing, and he understood that, and the handshake was real. I want to tell you what happened with Kwame, because he is the character in this story who gets the least space and probably deserves a little more. Kwame found out about the letter and the meeting from Edmund. Edmund told him, I think, because Edmund needed to explain why the sale structure had a new line item in it, a payment obligation that had not been there before. Kwame called Marcus. He was not angry, exactly. He was unsettled in the way that people who have been handed something are unsettled when they realize what was already attached to it. He said, I didn't know Vera wasn't being paid. Marcus said, I know. He said, I thought she was just helping out. Marcus said, she was working. Helping out and working are not the same thing, even when they look the same. Kwame was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to talk to her. He came to the house on a Saturday. We sat on the back porch. He brought his wife, a woman named Adiz who I had met twice at family gatherings and who had the particular quality of paying close attention while appearing to be simply present. I noticed this about her and filed it. Kwame said, I feel like I'm inheriting something that came at a cost I didn't understand. I said, you're not responsible for the cost. You are responsible for what you do from here. He nodded. Then he said something I did not expect. He said, when I take over, I want a proper operations manager. Paid market rate, full title, from the first day. Would you be willing to help me recruit for it? I looked at him. He was 28. He had been there 11 months when Edmund announced the sale. He had not earned the company exactly, but he had also not designed the situation he was in, and he was sitting on my porch asking me to help him do it right. I said, yes, on one condition. He said, name it. I said, the job description lists every responsibility accurately. No, it's family. No, just helping out. A real job, a real salary, a real title, from day one. He said, agreed. I wrote the job description. Adiz, it turned out, sat in on the interviews. She had a sharper eye than anyone gave her credit for. They hired someone good. I trained her for 2 weeks. She is still there. The night before the sale closed, Abina called me. Not Edmund. Abina. She called at 8:47 p.m. and I saw her name on the screen and I sat down before I answered because something in the way she had looked at me across the meeting room table 2 weeks earlier told me this call was going to matter. She said, I want to tell you something before tomorrow. I said, all right. She said, when I kept the books for Edmund in the early years, I did not keep records the way you kept records. I did not know to. And when the company grew large enough that he brought in real accounting help, I went back to running the house, and nobody asked about what I had done to keep us going in the years before. I did not know how to ask them to ask. I held the phone very still. She said, I found out what you did, the folder, the attorney, 2 weeks before the letter arrived. Edmund mentioned that Marcus had spoken to someone. I asked questions. I understood what you had prepared. She paused. She said, I did not say anything to stop it. I want you to know that. I could have warned Edmund, and I did not. I do not think it was my place to warn him. I think it was my place to let a woman be paid for her work. I said, thank you. She said, I should have said something earlier. Years earlier. I saw what you were doing and I told you to keep records and then I said nothing else, because I had spent 30 years saying nothing else, and it was a habit I did not break in time to help you more than I did. I said, you broke it when it counted. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. Then she said, your daughter is 7? I said, yes. She said, tell her what you did. When she is old enough, tell her the whole thing. Not as a warning, as a map. We said good night. I sat for a long time in the quiet kitchen with the phone in my hand and Adwoa asleep upstairs and Kofi asleep down the hall and Marcus reading in the next room, and I thought about maps. About the ones you draw for yourself by living something, and the ones you leave for the people who come after you, and how the distance between having them and not having them can be the difference between someone knowing where they stand and someone spending 6 years finding out the hard way. I went to check on the children. Adwoa was curled around her stuffed elephant, her breath even and deep. Kofi had kicked off his blanket, which he does every night, and I tucked it back around him. I stood in the doorway for a while. Then I went to my desk and opened the folder and started a new section. I labeled it, What I Want Them to Know. And I started writing. Osebarima Construction registered in Ohio 14 months after the sale closed. We started with 12 employees, 3 of whom had worked at the original company and chose to follow Marcus when his non-compete period ended. Roy Ellison's electrical firm was our first subcontractor contract. Roy said, I always knew where the company really lived. I built the filing system from scratch. Again. This time I labeled the first file, Vera Osebarima, co-founder, operations. And underneath, all contributions documented from day one. The business cards arrived 3 weeks after incorporation. My name. My title. The company name with both our names in it. I looked at them for a long time before I put them in my bag. They are a small thing. They are also not a small thing at all. 12 employees in the first year. A system I built from scratch because that is what I do, and this time my name is on the building. Here is what I want to tell you before I close this out. There is a particular silence that surrounds the work of women in family businesses, and I do not think it is always intentional. I think it is habitual. I think families have a long tradition of dividing the visible work, the sales calls, the project management, the client dinners, from the invisible work, the permits, the payroll, the insurance renewals, the 7 a.m. emails to vendors that keep a contract from falling apart, and of assuming that the invisible work does not need to be named because everyone can see it is being done. Everyone can see it is being done. But seeing is not the same as recording. And when the time comes to divide what has been built, what is recorded is what counts. My father told me that at 12 years old. I did not fully understand it until I was 37, sitting across from a business broker's valuation of a company I had helped build and whose sale did not include my name. I am not angry at Edmund. I want to say that clearly. He did not set out to cheat me. He set out to take care of his family in the way he understood taking care of his family, and his understanding had a shape that excluded the women's work from the accounting. That shape was not personal. It was old. It was passed down, the way so many things are passed down, not as a lesson, but as an assumption so deep it does not feel like a choice. What I am is clear. Clarity is better than anger. Anger is loud and costs you energy and makes people focus on your volume instead of your content. Clarity is quiet and costs you nothing except the discipline to maintain it. And what it produces, a folder, a meeting, an agreement, a letter on company letterhead, a check for $235,000, lasts longer than any shouting would have. I also want to say something about Marcus, because he deserves more space in this story than he sometimes gets when I tell it. Marcus did not cause the problem. He also did not see it clearly enough, for long enough, to prevent it. Those are different things, and I have had to hold both of them at the same time, which is one of the more complicated things about being in a marriage where a family situation goes wrong. You are not at war with your spouse. But your spouse was inside the system that hurt you, and they had more power to change it than they used, and you have to find a way to be honest about that without making it the only thing that defines them. What Marcus did, when I finally made the folder visible, was look at it. He did not look away, did not minimize, did not tell me I was being sensitive or that it was just family or that he needed more time to think about it. He read every page and he said I should have seen it earlier, and he said yes without hesitating. I have been thinking about what it means to choose a partner. Not in the romantic sense, though that matters, but in the practical sense. A partner is someone who, when the thing you have been carrying alone is finally set on the table between you, picks up their half of it without being asked twice. Marcus picked up his half. He continues to. Our company is proof of that. Osebarima Construction registered in Ohio 14 months after the sale closed. We started with 12 employees, 3 of whom had worked at the original company and chose to follow Marcus when his non-compete period ended. Roy Ellison's electrical firm was our first subcontractor contract. Roy said, I always knew where the company really lived. I built the filing system from scratch. Again. This time I labeled the first file, Vera Osebarima, co-founder, operations. And underneath, all contributions documented from day one. The business cards arrived 3 weeks after incorporation. My name. My title. The company name with both our names in it. I looked at them for a long time before I put them in my bag. They are a small thing. They are also not a small thing at all. My daughter is now 8. She knows what we do, in the way 8-year-olds know things. Not in detail, but in the texture of daily life. She knows that Daddy manages the projects and Mama manages everything else. She knows that Mama's name is on the door. She has asked me once what the door name means, and I said it means that the people inside made it together and are not pretending otherwise. She nodded and went back to her caterpillar, or whatever she was attending to at the time. But I believe she heard it. I believe the things we say around children at 8 deposit themselves somewhere they cannot be reached for years, and then one day they are accessible, when the child needs them. I am depositing this. Your name goes on the door. From the first day. No, it's family, no just helping out. A real role, a real record, a real stake in what you are building. This is the rule, and it is not negotiable, and if the people you are building it with do not agree, then you are not building it together, you are building it for them, and that is a different thing entirely, and you deserve to know the difference before you have spent 6 years not knowing it. I want to close with something Abina said on the phone the night before the sale closed. She said, "Tell your daughter what you did. When she is old enough, tell her the whole thing. Not as a warning, as a map." I think about that phrase often. A map. Not a cautionary tale, not a horror story, not a lesson about how bad things can happen. A map. Here is the terrain. Here is where the road looked clear and wasn't. Here is where I slowed down because something felt wrong. Here is where I built the thing that saved me. Here is how I got from there to here, and here is where here is, and it is good, and you can find it too, if you keep your records and know your worth and don't stop when it gets hard. That is what I am handing my daughter. A map with my name on it, drawn on the paper I kept. Let me tell you about the first year of Osebarima construction, because it is the part of the story that comes after the resolution, and the part after the resolution is the part most stories skip, and I think it is actually the most important part. The first year was hard. Not in the dramatic way the previous 6 years had been hard, not the quiet, grinding invisibility, not the Friday night client dinners where my name was not mentioned. A different kind of hard. The kind that comes from building something from scratch with your own name on it, which means that every mistake is yours and every success is also yours, and the weight of both of those things is heavier than it looks from the outside. We started in a 2-room office in a building on Spring Grove Avenue. Marcus had his desk and I had mine, and between us we had a shared printer that jammed approximately twice a week and a coffee maker that I had carried from home because I was not buying a new one until the company had been profitable for 6 consecutive months. These are the details of starting something real. Nobody talks about the jammed printer. I built the filing system in the first week. Same process as always, organized by category, dated, labeled. But this time I built it differently. I built it with 2 equal sections from the beginning. Marcus's projects, my operations. Side by side, same drawer depth, same label font. I sat back and looked at it on the Friday afternoon of week 1 and felt something I did not immediately have a word for. Later I identified it as, this is what it is supposed to look like. The first payroll I ran for our own employees. I printed 2 copies of every record. One for the business file, one for the archive I was building in parallel, the long-term documentation that would grow with the company the way a growth ring grows with a tree. Invisible from the outside, evidence of everything from the inside point. One of our first employees was a woman named Sandra, our project coordinator. Sandra was 32, competent, fast, and had the specific quality of asking exactly the right question at the exact moment the answer was needed. I interviewed her myself. I hired her myself. Her offer letter was signed by both me and Marcus, our names side by side in the signature block. She looked at it when I handed it to her and said, 2 founders. I said, yes. She said, good. I've worked for companies where one name was on the door and another person was running it without the credit. I like knowing who I'm actually working for from the start. I looked at her. I said, then you'll fit here. She has been with us since month 1. She is now our operations lead. Her business card, which arrived in week 3 with all the others, has her name and her actual title, and both of them are accurate, and nobody had to fight for that. In month 4, we landed a contract that made us both sit down when the signed paperwork arrived. A 16-unit townhouse development, the largest single contract in either of our careers. Marcus had spent 8 weeks cultivating the relationship. I had prepared the proposal package, the capability overview, the insurance documentation, the project timeline, the financial references. We submitted it together. When the developer called to award the contract, he asked to speak with both of us. He said, we read the proposal carefully. It's clear this is a 2-person operation in the best sense. I want both of you in the room on this one. We were both in the room. We were both in every room after that. There is a specific moment from month 7 that I want to tell you about. because it is the one I return to when I need to remember why the 6 years of documentation mattered. We were on site at the townhouse development, early morning, walking the foundation line with the lead carpenter. Marcus was talking about framing sequence. I was reviewing the permit schedule on my phone, checking that the next inspection was logged correctly. The developer's representative, a man named Craig, was watching us. He said, almost to himself, "You two run a tight ship." Marcus said, "She built the ship." He said it casually, the way you say something that is simply true. Not performing generosity, not making a point. Just stating a fact in the same tone you'd state the weather. Craig looked at me. I nodded, because it was accurate, and I have stopped qualifying accuracy. I thought about Edmund at the client dinner in year 4. We have good people. His words, describing my work without my name. And now Marcus, 7 years later, in a different company with our names on both sides of the door. She built the ship. I did not cry. I have never been a person who cries at the right moments. I cry in parking lots and at 11 p.m. and while reading things that are only tangentially related to what I am actually feeling. But I felt it. I filed it, not in the folder but in the part of me that is older than the folder and will still be there when the folder is gone. She built the ship. Month 11, I hired our first dedicated bookkeeper, a young man named Trevor who was fresh out of his accounting degree and who reminded me, in his precision and his willingness to ask questions, of myself at 22 before I learned that precision was something you had to protect, not just practice. I spent 3 weeks training Trevor. I walked him through every system. I explained not just how to do each task but why the task existed, what it was protecting, what had gone wrong in operations I had seen where this particular thing was not done correctly. I was training him the way I wished someone had trained me, not just in the mechanics but in the theory, in the understanding that the work of keeping records is not administrative, it is foundational. On his last day of training, before he took over the bookkeeping independently, he asked me, "How did you learn all this?" I said, "Some of it from school. Some of it from my father. Most of it from 6 years of doing it without credit and realizing that the credit comes from the documentation, not the other way around." He wrote that down. I noticed. Good instinct. Trevor. The first year ended with a staff dinner at a restaurant we could now afford. 12 employees, the jammed printer replaced, the coffee maker joined by a second one because we had outgrown the first. Marcus gave a toast. He thanked the team by name, each person, specific contribution. Then he turned to me. He said, "And to Vera, who built every system in this room and whose name is on the door because it belongs there. We started this together and we are running it together and that is not going to change." 12 people raised their glasses. I raised mine. I did not make a speech. I am the kind of person whose speech is already in the filing cabinet, dated and indexed, and I do not need to repeat it out loud. But I will say this here to you, the dinner was better than the check. The check was significant, and the check was deserved, and the check paid for real things in my real life. But the dinner was the thing I had been working toward without knowing it, not the money, the visibility. My name said in a room attached to work I had actually done, in a company that was actually mine. That is what I had been asking for since year 2, when I sat across from Edmund at the kitchen table and said, "I think we need to talk about my role here." It took 6 years and a folder and an attorney and a negotiation and a new company and 11 months of building it from scratch. But I got there. We got there. 6 years, 1 folder, 47 emails with Edmund's own words in them, an attorney named Patricia who did not blink, a husband who read the whole thing and said yes without hesitating, a check for $235,000, and a company with both our names on the building. If this found you at the right time, if you are doing the work right now and wondering whether anyone sees it, I want you to hear this. Start the folder tonight. Date the first entry. Write down what you did this week, what you built, what you fixed, what you kept from falling apart. You do not need to know yet whether you will ever need it. You just need to start. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And if this story is for someone you know, someone who is doing the work and not getting the credit, Share it with them tonight. They might be waiting for permission to open the folder. This is it. Open the folder. Subscribe if you are new here. I will see you in the next one. And if you are sitting somewhere right now with a log that no one knows about and a role that has no title and a company that would not run without you, keep going. You are not invisible. You are the record. And the record, correctly kept, is permanent.